Living in Virginia, you're in the fast lane on the information superhighway. We've invested $3 billion in Virginia's broadband network to give you one of the fastest internet connection speeds in the world, so you can build relationships, bring new business to our state, and meet the future of education. It's amazing what we can do together. Visit VCTA.com to learn how broadband connects the Commonwealth.
From the General Assembly and the City of Richmond, I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast, connecting Virginians to their government. We're pleased to have with us Delegate Lee Ware, Chairman of the Finance Committee in the House of Delegates. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Woody. It's great to be back with you.
A lot of new members. I suppose that you anticipated this wave that occurred.
It's certainly a big change, and it is a tidal wave of new folks that are learning how it operates up close and personal, and learning what Virginia government does for so many different people, and how we operate. And I understand leadership has adopted a number of transparency things here. Talk to us about that. Probably one of the most obvious is right around us. There are cameras in every committee room that are running. Live streaming, so people are able, who have the interest and would like to know what's going on in a certain committee, can actually follow that from the comfort of their homes, as well as be here. Of course, we're open, as always have been. All our committee meetings are open to the public, and many people come to testify. And of course, now I believe at the subcommittee level there will be recorded votes. Yes, that is the practice that will begin this year in a full sense. So there will be those recorded committee votes, subcommittee votes. And of course, we're in a different building now. Have you adjusted to that yet? You know, I think we're all finding our way. It's as you know, a large building, and so as we discover where new offices are, committee meeting rooms, it's been a I won't say hide and seek, but it's been a whole new world for us this year in that regard as well. What's the expected date for move back to the old General Assembly building? We expect to be here. I was just talking to Governor Northam last week, and he said we're hoping the last year that I'm in, he's got a 4-year term, we'll be in the back in the General Assembly, or renovated General Assembly building. Great. Talk to us about, I believe you gave a speech recently focusing on the topic of civility. Can you tell us a little bit about that message? Yes. Woody, as I was looking at that, and part of it was thinking about all the new people, and almost half of the members of the House have been there 4 years or less. So it's not 4 years or less. Only the new freshmen who are coming this time, but 47 out of the 100 have been here 4 years or fewer. And so I wanted to address some of the things that we do, and the manner in which we try to carry things forward. There's lots of conversation always about the Virginia way, and there really is a very distinctive way forward. We will have our differences, we'll have our debates, and it was my effort to point the path forward as we have done so across the years. We come for a very quick session, and we get things hashed out in a lot of ways over the course of those days, and it was my reminder to us, as it were, that we do it together. So over the years, I guess there's been more or less civil activity amongst the membership. Mm-hmm. It is, and I think there are those of us that make it a point to get together both socially as well as in committees, and meeting each other in the hallways or in offices to converse, to talk about the rationale for what we do, the bills that we put forward, and it seems to me there's been a significant effort toward that this year as well. Yeah, I think the public doesn't understand that 90 to 99% of things that occur here are things that are agreed upon. It's the things that hit the media and the press, primarily the big ticket items, social issues that really have
kind of tarnish the image from time to time of the General Assembly?
It's like any operation. It's the noisemakers and the squeaky wheels that somehow get the biggest splash, as it were. But there's a great deal of methodical, deliberative work that goes on here, and that's as it should be, and that's what needs to be done if we're going to make sure we deliver the services that people expect, whether it's highways, whether it's public safety, whether it's education. There's a lot of spade work and steady work that has to be done.
Now, one of the fundamental differences that I think lends itself to that civility and the necessity to get things done is that the state of Virginia's Constitution requires a balanced budget, unlike our friends in Washington who never have to balance a budget. And when was the last time they did that, actually?
I can remember we used to say it was back when Nixon was president. I think there was one or two in the during the Clinton years, and those are pretty rare in the last couple of generations.
And of course, we have seen the discord that currently exists there. There's an agreement now, at least until February 8th, on a continuing resolution, which has become par for the course there. Those things have a significant impact on the state of Virginia, do they not?
They certainly do, and we are affected dramatically because we have so many federal facilities, such as significant defense presence, and there are a number of companies in Virginia whose primary client, as it were, is the federal government. They provide services, provide manufacturing on behalf of defense and other elements of the federal government. So if there's a shutdown or some other cessation, it can affect Virginia very significantly, as much as any other state.
And of course, the recent legislation on tax reform has having an impact already on the state. You chair the Finance Committee, and I know you and your members, along with members of the Appropriation Committee, are wrestling with some really interesting issues. Talk to us about those.
Wrestling is the right verb. It's a large measure. It's a complicated measure. It was passed very late in the year, December 22nd. So when we started on the second Wednesday in January, there was a lot for us to digest and then to diagnose. And so there is we're reviewing that, we are grappling with that, and we have made some preliminary steps in integrating that into Virginia's tax code. We do an annual bill, as you know, that conforms the Virginia tax code substantially to the federal code, which simplifies tax preparation for the ordinary citizen, as well as CPAs and others who prepare tax forms and so on. So we've done that conformity. That's moving along quickly. I expect that to be on the governor's desk, probably one of the first bills he sees. And at the same time, we are looking at the broad reach of this very substantial tax reform package that was passed late last year. And we may have to come back to revisit that either in a special session or early in the session in 2018 to make sure that we are making a Virginia-centered response that balances as best we can how it affects people.
Now, I understand there's been an unusually high influx of what's known as non-withholding payments already, which has brought glee to some people's eyes, but caution to others. Explain that a little bit more for us.
Big picture terms, Woody, and you're right on the money. Non-withholding has come in very substantially here, right in just the last few weeks, probably in response to this tax reform package and people trying to set their tax forms and
Sure.
returns to match as best it can for them. So we've seen a big influx, as we did about 4 years ago, at sort of a one-time deal. And non-withholding, unlike those that are taxes that are withheld, weekly or monthly or bi-monthly, as many people experience, as I knew as a teacher, is a very different thing because you've got a regular settled amount that you send in, and then you true it up in your tax return at the end of the year. Non-withholding is more specialized, and so we've seen a dramatic increase in that in the last couple of weeks, as we did 4 years ago. 4 years ago, we, I won't say over-relied, but we saw that, we accepted it coming in and based our programming on that, and then suddenly found ourselves in a hole when the next year non-withholding did not sustain at that level because of changes in the federal tax code that came into effect at that point. So we don't want to find ourselves at the end of this year facing the same kind of hole in the budget.
And we really don't know whether a number of accountants are counseling high worth individuals, for example, to pay in advance things that they won't be able to deduct next year. For example, there's a cap, I believe, on state and local taxes.
Right.
There's a cap on mortgage interest that will become effective. So we're not real sure why these things are going on. That's why there's a need for caution, I take it.
That's exactly right, and you've anticipated some of the things that we suspect may be the case and leading to this. And it's probably worth noting that for Virginia, as a state that relies substantially on the income tax and the sales tax, the personal income tax is 2/3 of the income of the Commonwealth. Sales tax is on the order of 18 and 19% of our total revenue for the Commonwealth. So those are big ticket items.
So there's a potential, I take, that we want to avoid with these people who are paying in advance. We don't want to have to refund money to them come next May.
Well, what we don't want to do is budget anticipating that will continue.
Right, right. Now, you mentioned conformity.
Yes.
And we know at the federal level there's a much higher standard deduction, especially for married couples.
Yes.
How will that work on the state level?
That is the $64,000 question, and for some people it may come in that magnitude. But we are looking right now to see what would be the most equitable way going forward for us to, recognizing the change at the federal level, true up, as it were, the Virginia tax code so that we don't put some people behind the 8 ball because of the changes that occur at the federal level.
Right. I guess there's always been talk from year to year about the need to reform the state tax code. That's not an easy thing to do because, again, you have to look at it holistically. To the extent you plug a hole on one end, you create another one on another end, so to speak. That's a pretty complicated process, isn't it?
It really is, Woody. It's we've been looking at it. A committee that I've served on and in the last term have chaired is a study commission which is to evaluate tax preferences. Things like land preservation tax credit and many, many others, neighborhood assistance, that have been in place for a number of years, understanding what it is that they accomplish, trying to get a firmer grasp on the value, and are they achieving what we hope that they will achieve? And I think the historic rehabilitation tax credit is one that's done a lot of good. But all of those, to come back to your original question, have to be considered if you're looking at tax reform. Does something that made sense in 1990 make sense today? Does the tax code that doesn't even consider services in 2018 still make sense as it did in the 1960s when manufacturing was a far more dramatic part of our economy? And I think all those things have to be looked at, and as you rightly say, it's to do it in a way that is equitable across the board, but recognizes the changes that have occurred in our economy is going to be an important one going forward.
Now, to what extent is the tax code and the budget a significant factor with the rating agencies in New York?
Yeah. Virginia has had an earned reputation of a balanced budget and working with a structurally sound financial arrangement. And that's been the case across administrations of both parties going back for decades. We hold the highest rating you can have, a AAA bond rating, and to maintain that, as all of us want to do, we have to continue to have both a balanced budget, but also one that doesn't rely on gimmicks, as can be the case in some public budgeting. And we've really had a commitment to doing that through the years.
And it makes a huge difference to the extent the state needs to issue bonds to borrow money, because when you have such a high rating, bond rating, you can borrow money at a very low interest rate.
You explained the whole thing. It's right there. That's exactly right. And that's important because if you're not paying it in interest payments, you can pay those deputies more. You can afford to do more for teachers. You can afford to incrementally do good things in a lot of public settings.
Same thing in terms of state retirement funds, for example. I know that we've had to do some things over the past few years to make sure that is adequately funded as well.
Yes, it is, and that is going to be an ongoing challenge. There are a number of our sister states that are facing dramatic financial challenges because they have not looked at retirement in the current era, which is very different. Many private companies have retrenched on that, have altered what they do on retirement, and I think as we look at the realities of economics in our time, Virginia obviously is going to have to continue what we have already begun to do, which is to reconsider how we do the Virginia retirement system. I'll tell you, for me as a retired teacher who spent a lot of years in public school teaching, that matters a great deal to me personally as well as more broadly.
Absolutely, and the state has transitioned from, I forget the term that's used,
From defined
benefit contribution to
Right.
more of a 401k type of hybrid, at least as I understand it.
That's exactly right. And one of the things that we've done to make sure that we're doing this in a way that is fair to the state employees is it's with new hires that are coming in.
Right.
It's not people we've made promises to. We're holding to those commitments that we've made over the course of the decades.
A lot of these new employees will not be state employees for 30 years, and the ability to port that retirement pension someplace else is really helpful to them as well.
Yes, indeed. That's we're talking about. We often use the term millennials, and that the expectation of that durable working experience in one institution, it just doesn't seem to have that same resonance for this generation.
Now, what's the difference between your committee, the Finance Committee, and the Appropriations Committee? Because on the Senate side, there's just a Finance Committee. So what's the distinction and why? Is it just an historical accident, for example?
It was historic purposeful is the way I would describe it, and it for years reflected very much what goes on in Washington. The House of Representatives is the one that originates budgets, and the Senate then considers it. Historically, in Virginia, that was the case as well. The House Appropriations Committee initiated the budget, and the House Finance Committee handled taxation. The Senate, historically, the Senate Finance Committee dealt with on the taxation side, but didn't have a budget. That changed in the early 1980s for reasons we could pursue, and as a teacher, I love to talk those kinds of things, but they have, in the Senate, taken up both of those functions in the Finance Committee since that time, whereas in the House we've maintained those two traditional, that sort of division of roles between the Appropriations Budget Committee and the Finance Committee, which deals with tax policy.
Now, over the past few years, there's been a lot of emphasis on the need to diversify the Virginia economy for the reasons we've already discussed about the failures of Washington, D.C., if you will. How are we doing in that regard, in your opinion?
There have been some real initiatives taken by recent governors in the area of economic development, and I think we've made substantial steps forward to re-diversify, as it were, the Virginia economy, which, when you hearken back actually a couple of generations back, well back, Virginia really did have a fairly diverse economy, both farming and ports and mining and manufacturing.
There was textiles and tobacco, exactly those as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as those sort of diminished over the course of the decades, we've come, through nobody's sort of considered action, but we've come to have a tremendous reliance on federal actions and federal economic development. And I think over time, as we've seen that, in recent years, we've made a concerted effort with some noteworthy achievements to broaden our economy.
And one of the things we've done recently is to invest more in the Port of Virginia. Mm-hmm. That is a huge economic driver for the state, especially with these larger ships that are able to come into our port, which is the deepest on the East Coast, as I understand it.
It's a tremendous success story. Woody, I had the first chance to do a real visit there. I've, of course, been by and through the port a number of times, but really took a tour of it just this fall, and it's an extraordinary operation, the sheer volume that goes through there. And as you rightly say, these large Panamax freighters, whose size is simply staggering, can be accepted here. And as a result of that, Virginia this last year is as big a port as there exists on the East and Gulf Coast in terms of its volume in the entire this part of our country.
And I believe part of that investment includes making the port even deeper, but there's also some other investments relating to larger cranes, more room there. I think the room is fairly limited, but at least there's a move to improve that in terms of efficiency.
As with so many industries, the technological innovations that there are to take those containers and move them and get them lined up, and they're there by the hundreds. As the trucks roll in and out to pick them up and return them, it's an extraordinary operation that's it's a sight to see.
Another hub of activity, I believe, is in Front Royal, Virginia. There's an inland port there, and as I understand it, those goods are shipped up there for distribution, not only within the state of Virginia, but throughout the nation.
Yeah. I can remember before I got in the legislature and I'd come past that inland port of Virginia, and I thought to myself, well, what is an inland port? And you've just described it. That's exactly what it is. It's containers that are shipped by rail way up there to Front Royal, and it's from there further redistributed to where it is that they go, and it's one of the unique economic drivers of that part of the Commonwealth.
And of course, agriculture and forestry bring in a lot of revenue to the state. I know you serve on that committee. Talk to us about its work and how important those industries are to the citizens here.
To me, it's one of the continuing success stories of Virginia, the amount of silviculture and agriculture that goes on, and the extension into areas that you wouldn't even have thought about some years ago. You think of the wine industry and the dramatic increase there's been there. Of course, our last governor was noteworthy for his encouragement of microbreweries and the development of local sources for many elements of that. It's to me one of the great stories, and the farming community in Virginia is really, in some respects, the heart and soul of who we are as Virginians. It goes back to our earliest years, and it's the vibrancy of that community is one of the great stories in Virginia that needs to be continually told. Between forestry products and farm products, that is the largest single segment of the Virginia economy.
Of course, we've got, as you mentioned, we have cattle, we have poultry, we've got corn, we've got soy. There even been some limited experiments, I believe, with hemp.
Yes. Because
that's still federally controlled in terms of regulation. But those products really lend themselves to the production of revenue, not only domestically but abroad through the Port of Virginia, as I understand it.
They do indeed. And Delegate Yost, who was with us for a number of years, was an innovator on the hemp, was a real champion of that. And as you say, the variety of different products that we have, specialty products, whether it's I think, for example, in my home county, there's an orchid grower who's internationally known for his pioneering work there, and he's one example of many people who in Virginia are doing unique and wonderful work and part of the flourishing of Virginia.
We still have health care, Medicaid expansion staring us in the face. That's a huge financial issue, if you will. Talk about the puts and takes of Medicaid expansion.
You know, Medicaid is a very substantial part of our budget. Before expansion, it has grown from, it was 9% of our general fund, that is our discretionary spending. It's come to where it's on the order of 22%.
22%.
And so it has already today, before expansion, been a very substantial driver of spending in Virginia. And so we've taken, as Virginia often does, a very cautious approach when we've looking to Medicaid expansion. We've had concerns as to whether this government in Washington that we referred to would be borrowing money to send to us. They tell us that they'll furnish 90%, but when you look at the numbers up there and you look at the experience of a number of our sister states who have expanded, and there are now 30 or 32 that have expanded, quite a few of them have found that it is a very difficult balancing act to try and cover those new costs.
Now, we also have an opioid crisis. It's not limited to Virginia, it's nationwide. That obviously will have an impact on health care, expenses associated with it, and the budget as well.
It is. We've taken some steps to try and mitigate that and to try and limit its growth and effect, but it's a daunting subject. It's one that it has tragic effects that have affected many of us. Many of us know people whose families have been touched by that, and it's one that we all are committed to trying to find answers for it as much as we can in the public realm.
And of course, you as a legislator, especially chairing the Finance Committee, have an obligation to balance all those competing interests, especially the financial ones. We haven't even mentioned education,
right,
which is another dent in the budget. Talk to us about education finance, how you think that's going, K through 12, our community colleges, and our institutions of higher learning.
We talk a lot about education, and that's entirely appropriate because it is 1/3 of our general fund spending in broad terms, and as it should be. When we think about the future, we're thinking about our children and the options that they have available to them and the opportunities. And we have historically had a strong, vibrant K-12, kindergarten through 12th grade education system, and so it continues to be one that we focus on. How do we prepare young people for the world that they will come into, whether it be through STEM education, technical training, allowing kids to finish and come out, even out of high school, with the skills to take on some of these jobs, many of which are well remunerated, well paid, and provide the kind of opportunities that they're looking for without having to go on to higher education. At the same time, of course, as a history and English teacher through the years, I'm keenly interested in the liberal arts and higher education as well, and we need to have young people prepared to achieve at the highest levels.
And for our veterans as well. I know you have a number of veterans in your senatorial district. It's important for them too.
It is absolutely important, and veterans are an integral part of Virginia with the big military installations, and of course the man we've just selected as Speaker has really made that his signature concern.
Exactly. Well, thank you for being here, Delegate Lee Ware, Chairman of the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Woody.
Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Comcast. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans. Mm-hmm.